So today we're going to cover how to find the exact value of a trig function without using your calculator. So there are two types of angles we need to focus on. The first one are called reference angles, which are angles where when you get them between 0 and 360, depending on the quadrant they're in, the reference angle will be 30, 45, or 60. If it's anything else, you have to use your calculator to get the value. Because these happen to have nice radicals, we can do them without a calculator, because we can kind of memorize these values. As you see, there should be a pattern in the table. They go from radical 0 up to radical 4 as you go through the numbers from 0 to 90. Similarly, for cosine, they go down. We're just going to simplify these so we have them all to use. Radical 0 over 2 is equal to 0. Radical 1 over 2 is equal to 1/2. Radical 2 over 2 doesn't simplify. Radical 3 over 2 doesn't simplify. And radical 4 over 2 is equal to 2 over 2, which is equal to 1. We'll do the same thing for the cosine values. And this is equal to 1. Now, in order to find the tangent values, it comes from what we were talking about in the previous class when we found these values using the trig function. So I'll go back to those briefly. So yesterday, or the other day when we were doing this in class, we focused on being given an angle, and we found these values by using trig functions. The x value was equal to, it was the cosine of 30 was equal to the adjacent side, which was x over the hypotenuse, which is 1, meaning that, and we got radical 3 over 2 when we used our calculator, so the cosine of 30 is our x value. Okay? And our y value was the sine of 30. For similar reasons, this was the opposite. So the sine of 30 was equal to y over 1, and it gave us 1/2. So the cosine of 30 was our x value, the sine of 30 was our y value. And that's pretty much how it's going to be for all functions here. So the cosine is our x value, and the sine of the angle will be our y value. Now, when it comes to doing tangent is the opposite over the adjacent, or the y value over the x value, or that makes tangent equal to the sine value over the cosine value. So we're going to fill in our table using this now. I just wanted to make this clear. By the way, we're going to do the same thing with quadrantal angles as well. So with a quadrantal angle, like let's say 360, the x value is 1 and 0, which would be the cosine of 360 and the sine of 360. So the method we use to find for the reference angles will apply for the quadrantal angles as well, except they have nicer numbers like 1s and 0s. All right, so let's find tangent. So on our table, to find the tangent of 0, we're going to take the sine of 0, which is equal to 0, divided by the cosine of 0, which is equal to 1, so this together is 1. For 30, we do the sine of 30 over the cosine of 30, which is going to be equal to 1/2 over radical 3 over 2. By keep change flip, we get 1/2 times 2 over radical 3. The 2's will cancel out, and we're given 1 over radical 3. And since we're not allowed to have a radical in the denominator, we're going to multiply the numerator and denominator by radical 3 to rationalize the denominator. And our final answer is radical 3 over 3. So that is the cosine of 30. And we can continue going through the table to find the other values. For 45, we're going to get sine of 45 over cosine 45, which is going to be equal to radical 2 over 2 over radical 2 over 2, and anything divided by itself is 1. We're going to do the same thing for 60. Sine of 60 over the cosine of 60 is going to be equal to radical 3 over 2 over 1 over 2. By keep change flip, we get radical 3 over 2 times 2 over 1, where the 2's cancel out, and our final answer is radical 3. And for the tangent of 90, that is going to be the sine of 90 over the cosine of 90, which is equal to 1 over 0, or undefined. So there are undefined values. These come up mostly with the with the reciprocal functions. So we can kind of do what we were just doing for tangent to find the reciprocal functions. We can just take our fractions and flip them over. So for instance, if I wanted to find the, let's say I wanted to find the cosecant of 45, I would need to know that cosecant is the reciprocal of sine. So I would just flip that over. So if I wanted to find the cosecant of 45, I would just take this and turn it into 2 over radical 2. I would rationalize the denominator and get 2 radical 2 over 2 and cancel those out. So radical 2 is the cosecant of 45. We're not going to focus too much on doing reciprocals right now. I just want you to know that you do it by taking your regular trig value and you flip it over. If you had something like 0 over 1, you could put it over 1 and flip that over and become undefined. All right, now on to actually calculating a trig value. We're going to do the cosine of 1020. So it's 5 steps. Step 1, we need a coterminal angle between 0 and 360. So I'm going to take 1020 and I'm going to keep adding 360s to it. I'm going to keep subtracting 360s until it lines up between 0 and 360. So I'm using my calculator on my phone. 1020 minus 360 is going to become the cosine of 660, which is still too big, so we'll do it again and get the cosine of 300. So that's step 1. So step 1, coterminal angle between 0 and 360, which is made this into 300. So that was step 1. Step 2, we are going to sketch its position on the graph and identify the quadrant that it is located in. So this is our initial ray. Our terminal ray is down here at 300, and we are in quadrant 4. So we have to sketch it. So this is 300 degrees, and this is quadrant 4. So we have to identify the quadrant we are in. That is important as well. Now, that means we can rewrite this using the reference angle. So the reference angle here is the angle formed by the x-axis and the terminal ray, which is here. That was 60 degrees. Now, when you use a reference angle, the trig function might become negative. Now, it depends on the quadrant that we're located in. In quadrant 1, all 3 trig functions are positive. And that's because the x value is positive and the y value are positive for a function here. So like x would be positive and y would be positive. Therefore, sine and cosine are positive, which makes tangent positive. But in quadrant 3, the y value is negative, meaning sine is negative, but cosine is positive. So this is why we're going to have a positive cosine of 60. Now, if we use our calculator, we would see it's 1/2. But without our calculator, we can look at the table and look at, for 60, for cosine, it's equal to 1/2. So this is 1/2. So if I were to run through the step-by-step process one more time, it's you find the coterminal angle between 0 and 360. You figure out what quadrant you're in. You write down the reference angle, then you determine if it's positive or negative. If I asked you to do this whole process for sine, instead, the sine of 1020, it would have been the same up until here, except we would have eventually made this negative sine of 60, and the negative sine of 60 would be equal to negative radical 3 over 2. So, and that's because this coordinate would be at the coordinate of 1/2, because that would have been the cosine of 300, and negative radical 3 over 2, which would have been the sine of 300. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at one quadrantal angle, and that'll be the end of this video. So let's say I asked you to do cosine of 360. Rather than cosine, just so I can leave this example for you to try in class, we're going to do tangent of 360. So first thing 630. First thing you're going to do is you're going to find a coterminal angle between 0 and 360. So we're going to subtract 360 from 630, and that gives us 270. So that's the first thing. We'll draw a sketch of the graph. Now, it doesn't belong in any quadrant because 270 is not is a quadrantal angle. So it's either here, which is 0, here, which is 90, here, which is 180, or here, which is 270. So this is the correct point. On the unit circle, the coordinate of this point is 0, -1. So what that means is that the cosine of 270 is equal to 0. The sine of 270 is equal to -1, because the x values are cosine values and the sine values are y values. And the tangent of 270 will be equal to -1 divided by 0, which is the sine over the cosine, which will eventually simplify to be undefined. So the tangent of 630 is undefined. The sine of 630 would have been -1, and the cosine of 630